The torrential spring rain turned the main street of Deer Lodge, Montana Territory, into a raging river within hours. Wilhelmina Grayson clutched her soaked carpetbag to her chest, the murky water already reaching her knees as she struggled to stay upright against the powerful current. The year was 1876, and she was beginning to believe this would be her last. Wilhelmina had arrived on the afternoon stagecoach, stepping off with high hopes of starting anew as the schoolteacher Deer Lodge had advertised for. No one had mentioned the creek that ran alongside the town had a habit of flooding during the spring rains. No one had been at the station to meet her either, leaving her to fend for herself as the skies opened up with a vengeance. She'd made it halfway to what she hoped was the hotel when the water began rushing down the street. Now, each step became more treacherous than the last, the current threatening to sweep her slender frame away with every passing moment. "Hold on," a deep voice called out. Through the sheets of rain, Wilhelmina could barely make out a tall figure splashing toward her, moving with confident, powerful strides despite the swirling water. As he drew closer, she saw he wore a wide-brimmed hat, the rain cascading off its edges, and a long duster that billowed around his legs. Before she could respond, strong arms swept beneath her, lifting her cleanly from the churning water. Her carpetbag remained clutched against her chest as she found herself cradled against a broad chest. Instinctively, her free arm wrapped around his neck. "You're not walking alone through this," the man said, his voice steady and reassuring against the roar of the rain and rushing water. "I've got you now." Looking up into his face, Wilhelmina saw kind eyes the color of summer wheat and a strong jaw darkened with stubble. Rain dripped from his hat brim as he carried her with surprising ease through the flood. "I'm Hayes Blackburn," he said, navigating the treacherous street with confident strides. "Local rancher, and you must be our new school teacher." "Wilhelmina Grayson," she managed to reply, her voice trembling partly from cold and partly from the unexpected intimacy of being held in a stranger's arms. "How did you know who I was?" Hayes gave a slight smile that transformed his rugged features. Not many young ladies arrive alone by stagecoach in Deer Lodge, especially ones carrying books that are peeking out of their bags. Wilhelmina glanced down at her carpetbag, where indeed the corner of a primer was visible through the gap in the leather. "The town's been waiting for you," he continued, stepping carefully onto the raised wooden sidewalk outside a two-story building with lodging painted on its sign. "Though I reckon no one expected you'd arrive in the middle of the worst flood we've had in 5 years. As they reached the shelter of the hotel's covered porch, Hayes gently set her down but kept a steadying hand at her elbow. Water streamed from both their clothes, pooling at their feet on the wooden planks. "Thank you," Wilhelmina said. Suddenly aware of her appearance, her blue traveling dress clung to her. Her blonde hair had come loose from its pins, and she must look like a drowned cat. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." "No need for thanks," Hayes replied, removing his hat and running a hand through dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Couldn't very well let Deer Lodge's new schoolteacher get swept away before her first day, could I?" The hotel door swung open, revealing a plump woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Land sakes," the woman exclaimed. "Come in before you both catch your death." Her eyes narrowed as she looked from Wilhelmina to Hayes. "Mr. Blackburn, I see you found our teacher, Mrs. Finch." Hayes nodded respectfully. "Miss Grayson was stranded in the flood. Thought I'd better bring her straight here." Mrs. Finch ushered them inside, clucking with concern. "Poor dear, you're soaked through. Mr. Blackburn, wait in the parlor while I get Miss Grayson settled. I'll have Betsy bring some coffee to warm you both." Hayes tipped his hat. "Much obliged, Mrs. Finch. I'll just make sure Miss Grayson's trunk gets delivered when it comes off the stage." Before Wilhelmina could thank him again, Mrs. Finch was bustling her toward the stairs, talking rapidly about hot baths and dry clothes. Looking back over her shoulder, she caught Hayes watching her, a curious expression on his face that made her heart skip a beat despite her waterlogged state. Little did Wilhelmina know that this unexpected rescue was just the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. In the week that followed, Wilhelmina settled into life in Deer Lodge. The floodwaters receded, leaving behind mud and debris but little permanent damage. The schoolhouse, a modest one-room building at the edge of town, had remained dry thanks to its position on higher ground. Mrs. Finch, who ran the hotel with military precision, had taken Wilhelmina under her wing, introducing her to the town's residents and filling her in on local histories and rivalries. But of Hayes Blackburn, she had seen little. He had disappeared after ensuring her trunk was safely delivered to her room, leaving behind only his name and the memory of strong arms carrying her through dangerous waters. "He keeps to himself mostly," Mrs. Finch explained over breakfast one morning. The Blackburn Ranch is one of the largest in the territory, about 5 miles outside town. His father built it from nothing, and Hayes has doubled its size since taking over 3 years ago when his pa passed. "Does he have family?" Wilhelmina asked, trying to sound merely curious rather than specifically interested. Mrs. Finch's eyes twinkled knowingly. "No wife, if that's what you're asking. Never found the right woman, I suppose. His mother died when he was just a boy. It's mainly him and his ranch hands out there." Before Wilhelmina could protest that she wasn't particularly interested in Hayes Blackburn's marital status, the door to the hotel dining room swung open, and the man himself strode in, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. He looked different in the daylight, taller somehow, his shoulders broader under a crisp blue shirt, his face clean-shaven now, revealing a strong jaw and high cheekbones. Several diners nodded greetings, which Hayes returned politely before his eyes found Wilhelmina. Recognition flashed across his features, followed by something else she couldn't quite identify. "Miss Grayson," he said, approaching her table. "Good to see you dried out and settling in." Wilhelmina felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Blackburn, I've been hoping to thank you properly for your assistance during the flood." "No need," he replied, his hat in his hands. "Anyone would have done the same." "Perhaps, but it was you who did," she persisted, "and I'm grateful." Something in her direct gaze seemed to catch him off guard. He cleared his throat. "Well then, you're welcome." After a moment's hesitation, he added, "How are you finding Deer Lodge?" "Everyone has been very welcoming," Wilhelmina said. "I start teaching tomorrow, 27 students from what I understand." "That would be about right." "The Jenkins have 6 alone," he said with a slight smile. "You've got your work cut out for you." "I look forward to it. I've always believed education is the foundation of civilization, even perhaps especially on the frontier." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Strong convictions." "We could use more of that around here." He gestured to an empty chair at her table. "May I join you for a moment? There's something you should know about the school." "Of course," she replied, curiosity piqued. Hayes sat, placing his hat on an empty chair. Up close, she noticed the tiny lines at the corners of his eyes, laugh lines, though he didn't strike her as a man who laughed often. "The school board, which consists of 3 ranchers, including myself, and the mayor has been divided about certain aspects of education," he began, his voice low. "Specifically, whether to continue teaching the Salish children alongside the white children." Wilhelmina stiffened. "I wasn't aware there was a question about that." "There wasn't until recently." Some new settlers from back east have been pushing to segregate the school or stop educating the Indian children altogether. His expression darkened. I disagree strongly. The Salish have lived peacefully with Deer Lodge since its founding. Many of them work on local ranches, including mine. Their children deserve the same opportunities as any others. I couldn't agree more, Wilhelmina said firmly. In my application, I stated clearly that I would teach any child willing to learn, regardless of background. Relief visibly washed over Hayes's features. Good. I hoped that was the case, but I wanted to be sure. The previous teacher left partly because of this controversy. I wanted to warn you before someone like Thaddeus Wilkes corners you with his opinions. I appreciate the warning, Mr. Blackburn, but I assure you I'm not easily intimidated. A genuine smile spread across his face. No, I don't imagine you are, Miss Grayson, not a woman who stands her ground in floodwater. Their eyes held for a moment longer than was strictly proper, and Wilhelmina felt something flutter in her chest. Mrs. Finch chose that moment to approach with a fresh pot of coffee. "Coffee, Mr. Blackburn?" she asked, though she was already pouring him a cup. "Thank you, Mrs. Finch," he replied, breaking his gaze from Wilhelmina's. "Just stopped in to pick up some supplies and thought I'd say hello to Miss Grayson." "MMHMM," Mrs. Finch hummed, not bothering to hide her amusement. "Will we see you at the Founders' Day dance next Saturday?" Hayes shifted uncomfortably. "Hadn't planned on it. Spring's a busy time at the ranch." "Nonsense. All work and no play makes for a dull life. Miss Grayson will be there, won't you, dear? Her first Deer Lodge social event." Put on the spot, Wilhelmina nodded. "Yes, I've been told attendance is practically mandatory for new residents." "There you have it, Mrs. Finch said triumphantly to Hayes. "Can't have our new schoolteacher without a dance partner now, can we?" Hayes cleared his throat, a hint of color touching his tanned cheeks. "Well, in that case, perhaps I could stop by for a spell." He stood, reclaiming his hat. "I should be getting back." "Miss Grayson, good luck tomorrow with the children. If you need anything for the school, don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you, Mr. Blackburn," Wilhelmina replied, struck by how formal they sounded after the intimacy of their first meeting. As Hayes departed, Mrs. Finch sat in the chair he'd vacated, her eyes twinkling. "Well now, that's the most I've heard Hayes Blackburn say at one time in years. You've certainly made an impression." Wilhelmina sipped her coffee to hide her smile. "He seems interesting." "Interesting doesn't begin to cover it, Mrs. Finch replied. "That man has the respect of everyone in this territory, even those who disagree with him. Built that ranch into something special, and he's fair to everyone who works for him, white or Indian. But since his father died, he's buried himself in work." "People cope with grief differently," Wilhelmina observed, thinking of her own loss, her parents, taken by influenza 3 years ago, leaving her alone in the world at 22. "True enough," Mrs. Finch agreed, "but there comes a time to rejoin the living." She patted Wilhelmina's hand. "Now, about that dance. We'll need to make sure you have a suitable dress." As Mrs. Finch launched into a discussion of appropriate attire, Wilhelmina found her thoughts drifting to Hayes Blackburn and wondering what it might be like to dance in those strong arms that had carried her so effortlessly through the floodwaters. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Wilhelmina arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early, arranging books and preparing the day's lessons with meticulous care. At precisely 8 o'clock, she rang the bell that hung outside the schoolhouse door, its clear tone carrying across the awakening town. Children began arriving immediately, some alone, others in sibling groups, a few accompanied by parents curious about the new teacher. Wilhelmina greeted each one warmly, taking mental notes of names, ages, and the complex web of family relationships that connected many of them. Among the last to arrive were 4 Salish children walking close together, their expressions guarded. The oldest, a boy of about 12, met her gaze directly. "Good morning," Wilhelmina said, smiling. "Welcome to school." "I am Joseph," the boy replied in careful English. "These are my sister Mary and my cousins Thomas and Sarah." "I'm very pleased to meet you all," Wilhelmina said, gesturing toward the open door. "Please find seats. We'll be starting momentarily." As the children filed in, a man on horseback approached the schoolhouse. Thaddeus Wilkes, she presumed. Based on Hayes's description, a heavy-set man with a florid face and expensive clothes that marked him as a man of means. "Miss Grayson," he called, dismounting. "A word before you begin." Steeling herself, Wilhelmina stepped away from the door. "Mr. Wilkes, I presume? I'm afraid I have a classroom full of children waiting. Perhaps we could speak after school hours." Wilkes frowned, unused to being put off. "This won't take but a moment. I noticed the Salish children entering. I wanted to make sure you understood the special circumstances. I understand that all children in Deer Lodge deserve an education, Mr. Wilkes," Wilhelmina said pleasantly but firmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 27 students waiting to begin their school day." Wilkes's face darkened. "Young lady, you don't understand the situation here. Those Indian children are under my care during school hours," she interrupted. "As are all the children of Deer Lodge. Good day, Mr. Wilkes. I'd be happy to discuss educational philosophy with you at a more appropriate time." Without waiting for his response, Wilhelmina turned and entered the schoolhouse, closing the door firmly behind her. Through the window, she saw Wilkes stand there for a moment, his face a study in frustrated authority before he remounted and rode away. Taking a deep breath, she faced her class. 27 young faces looked back at her with varying degrees of curiosity, boredom, and in a few cases, outright mischief. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and confident. "I am Miss Grayson, and I am honored to be your teacher. In this classroom, we will learn reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and science. But most importantly, we will learn to think for ourselves and to treat each other with respect and kindness." Her eyes swept the room, noting the Salish children sitting together at the back, slightly apart from the others. "In this room, we are all equal. We are all here to learn and grow together. I expect each of you to help one another and to remember that true strength comes not from bullying or excluding others, but from lifting each other up." A small hand raised in the second row, a girl of about 8 with pigtails and a missing front tooth. "Yes," Wilhelmina acknowledged her. "Miss Grayson, my pa says Indians ain't supposed to be in school with us," the girl said innocently. A tense silence fell over the classroom. Wilhelmina approached the girl's desk and knelt beside it, bringing herself to eye level. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Lucy. Lucy Miller." "Well, Lucy, people sometimes have different opinions about things. But in this classroom, my opinion is what matters, and I believe every child deserves to learn. The Salish were here long before any of our families arrived. They have taught us how to live on this land. Now we can share our knowledge with them, just as they have shared theirs with us. Does that make sense?" Lucy considered this, then nodded. "I guess so. My ma says we should judge people by how they act, not what they look like." "Your mother is a wise woman," Wilhelmina smiled. "Now, shall we begin our lessons?" The day passed in a blur of introductions, assessments, and establishing routines. By afternoon, Wilhelmina had a much clearer picture of her students' abilities and needs. Some could barely write their names, while others were ready for advanced readers. The Salish children were quiet but attentive, with Joseph showing a particular aptitude for mathematics. When the final bell rang, the children gathered their things and filed out. Several parents waited outside to walk their youngest home. Wilhelmina stood at the door, saying goodbye to each student by name. As the schoolyard emptied, she noticed a rider approaching Hayes Blackburn, leading a second horse. Her heart gave a little jump that she immediately chided herself for. "Miss Grayson," he called, stopping both horses a respectful distance away. "Thought you might like to see a bit more of Deer Lodge and the surrounding area, now that it's not underwater." Wilhelmina hesitated only briefly. "That's very kind, Mr. Blackburn. I would enjoy that." "Call me Hayes," he said, dismounting in one fluid motion. "Everyone does." "Then you must call me Wilhelmina," she replied, "though most people find it quite a mouthful, Will for short." "Wilhelmina suits you," he said. "Strong name for a strong woman." He helped her mount the second horse, a gentle mare with a white blaze down her face. "This is Daisy, steadiest horse on the ranch. She's beautiful," Wilhelmina said, settling into the side saddle and arranging her skirts. "I haven't ridden since leaving Boston, but I used to love it." Boston. Hayes looked surprised as he remounted his own horse, a powerful bay stallion. "That's quite a journey to Deer Lodge." "I wanted a fresh start," she said simply, not elaborating on the lonely years after her parents' deaths, teaching in a Boston school where she was just one of many anonymous instructors. Hayes seemed to understand her reticence. "Well, Montana territory is certainly good for fresh starts." "Shall we?" They rode at a leisurely pace, Hayes pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history. He showed her where the creek normally ran before the flood, took her past the lumber mill that provided the town's main industry, besides ranching, and finally led her to a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was breathtaking, mountains rising majestically in the distance, the town of Deer Lodge nestled in the valley below, and vast expanses of grassland dotted with cattle and the occasional stand of trees. "It's magnificent," Wilhelmina breathed. "This is why I could never leave," Hayes said, his voice soft. "No matter how hard the winters or how difficult the work, this land gets into your blood. I can see why." She turned to look at him, finding him already watching her, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for showing me." "I hear you had a run-in with Thaddeus Wilkes this morning," Hayes said, changing the subject. Wilhelmina raised an eyebrow. "News travels fast." "Small town," he shrugged. "Wilkes was complaining loudly at the general store about the headstrong new schoolteacher who doesn't know her place." "Did he indeed?" Wilhelmina couldn't help but laugh. "Well, Mr. Wilkes will find I know my place perfectly well at the head of my classroom, teaching all who wish to learn." Hayes grinned, a full smile that transformed his serious face. "I would have paid good money to see his face when you shut the door on him." "It was rather satisfying," she admitted, "though I'm sure I've made an enemy." "Wilkes has influence," Hayes acknowledged, "but he doesn't run this town no matter what he thinks. The school board hired you knowing your views, and most folks here judge people on their merits." "Including you?" she asked boldly. "Especially me," he replied, holding her gaze. "I don't much care where people come from or what they look like. I care about who they are inside, their character, their heart." The intensity in his eyes made Wilhelmina's breath catch. For a moment she thought he might say more, but instead he looked away, gesturing toward the setting sun. "We should head back before it gets dark," he said, his voice gruff. "Wouldn't want people talking." "Heaven forbid," Wilhelmina murmured, a touch of disappointment coloring her tone. They rode back mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. As they approached the hotel, Hayes dismounted and came around to help her down. His hand spanned her waist, lifting her effortlessly from the saddle. For a brief moment, her hands rested on his shoulders, their faces close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Then he set her gently on the ground and stepped back, clearing his throat. Thank you for the tour, Wilhelmina said, smoothing her skirts to hide her flustered state. My pleasure, Hayes replied. I'll see you at the Founders' Day dance on Saturday. Yes, I'll be there, he nodded, remounting his horse and taking Daisy's reins. Good night, Wilhelmina. Good night, Hayes. As she watched him ride away, leading Daisy alongside, Wilhelmina felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. Hayes Blackburn was not like any man she had known before, not like the polished Boston gentleman who had courted her half-heartedly before her parents' deaths, nor like the frontier men she had encountered since arriving in Montana, with their rough manners and direct ways. Hayes was something altogether different, a man of contradictions, educated yet untamed, gentle yet powerful, reserved yet passionate about his convictions. And despite her best intentions to focus solely on establishing herself as Deer Lodge's teacher, Wilhelmina couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse whenever he was near. With a small sigh, she turned and entered the hotel, where Mrs. Finch was waiting with knowing eyes and 1,000 questions Wilhelmina wasn't sure she was ready to answer. The week flew by in a flurry of lessons, meetings with parents, and settling into the rhythms of Deer Lodge. Wilhelmina quickly earned the respect of both her students and their families, with her fair treatment of all children and her obvious passion for teaching. Even Thaddeus Wilkes had been temporarily silenced, though she caught him watching her with narrowed eyes when she accompanied the Salish children partway home one afternoon. Of Hayes, she saw little, though she found herself looking for him whenever she ventured into town. According to Mrs. Finch, spring calving kept ranchers busy from sunup to sundown, and the Blackburn Ranch, with its substantial herd, would be especially demanding of its owner's time. Saturday arrived with perfect weather for the Founders' Day dance. The town hall had been transformed with bunting and spring wildflowers, and a band consisting of a fiddler, banjo player, and accordion player set up on a small platform at one end of the room. Mrs. Finch had helped Wilhelmina prepare, lending her a beautiful blue dress that had belonged to her daughter, now married and living in Helena. It brings out your eyes, the older woman said approvingly as Wilhelmina twirled before the mirror. And with your hair up like that, you look every inch the sophisticated teacher, though I dare say a certain rancher might wish to see those golden locks tumbling down. Mrs. Finch, Wilhelmina protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. Oh, don't mind me, Mrs. Finch chuckled. I'm just an old woman who enjoys seeing young people find happiness. Now, let's go before all the good punch is gone. The dance was already in full swing when they arrived. It seemed the entire population of Deer Lodge and the surrounding area had turned out for the celebration. Children darted between adults, farmers and ranchers stood in groups discussing crops and cattle, and ladies clustered near the refreshment table, eyeing potential dance partners. Wilhelmina was immediately surrounded by her students, eager to show their teacher off to parents and siblings. She was introduced to so many people in such quick succession that the names and faces began to blur together. Miss Grayson, might I have this dance? A young man with a carefully waxed mustache appeared at her elbow. She recognized him as the bank manager's son, though his name escaped her. Mr. Peterson, isn't it? She said, accepting his offered hand. I would be delighted. As they joined the other couples on the dance floor, Wilhelmina scanned the room surreptitiously, looking for a tall figure in a cowboy hat, but Hayes was nowhere to be seen. Looking for someone, Miss Grayson? Mr. Peterson asked, guiding her through the steps of a waltz. Just taking in the festivities, she replied smoothly. This is my first Deer Lodge social event after all. Well, we're honored to have such a lovely new addition to our community, he said, his grip on her waist tightening slightly. Perhaps after this dance I could show you the garden outside. It's quite beautiful in the moonlight." Before Wilhelmina could formulate a polite refusal, a deep voice interrupted them. "I believe this is my dance, Peterson." Hayes Blackburn stood beside them, looking almost unrecognizable in a crisp black suit and white shirt, his dark hair neatly combed, though a stubborn lock still fell across his forehead. He'd clearly made an effort to clean up for the occasion, but there was no disguising the inherent ruggedness of his bearing. Peterson's face fell, but he stepped back with a forced smile. "Of course, Blackburn. Miss Grayson, thank you for the dance." As he walked away, Hayes took his place, one hand resting lightly on Wilhelmina's waist, the other clasping her fingers. "Hope I didn't overstep," he said quietly. "Peterson has a reputation for cornering new ladies in town with his moonlight garden tours." "My hero once again," Wilhelmina said with a small smile, "though I assure you I can handle overeager young men." "I don't doubt it for a second," Hayes replied, leading her into the dance with surprising grace. "But I promised you a dance, and Hayes Blackburn keeps his promises." "I was beginning to think you weren't coming," she admitted. "Had a difficult calving that couldn't wait," he explained, "but I wouldn't miss seeing you at your first Founder's Day dance." The way he said it, so matter-of-factly, made her heart skip. "Well, I'm glad you made it." They moved together as if they'd been dancing for years, Hayes leading confidently, but not forcefully. Wilhelmina was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, warm even through the fabric of her dress, and the subtle scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "You look beautiful tonight," he said after a moment, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Blue suits you." "Thank you," she replied, feeling oddly breathless. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Blackburn." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Don't get used to it." "Most days, I'm covered in dust and cow manure." Wilhelmina laughed, drawing curious glances from nearby dancers. "How terribly unromantic of you to mention." "Never claimed to be a romantic man," Hayes said, though the look in his eyes belied his words. "No." "Then why did you really come to the dance tonight?" The question hung between them as the music swelled to its conclusion. Hayes's steps slowed, and for a moment they simply stood together on the dance floor, hands still joined. "Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I pulled you from that flood," he admitted, his voice rough with honesty. Wilhelmina's breath caught in her throat. Before she could respond, the music ended, and applause broke out around them. Hayes released her hand reluctantly, taking a small step back. "Would you like some punch?" he asked, as if he hadn't just upended her world with his confession. "Yes," she managed, needing a moment to collect herself. "That would be lovely." As Hayes went to fetch their refreshments, Wilhelmina was immediately surrounded by several of the town's matrons, all eager to comment on her dance partner. "My stars, if Hayes Blackburn isn't sweet on you, I'll eat my bonnet," declared Mrs. Miller, Lucy's mother. "He hasn't attended a social function in over a year, and here he is, dancing and looking at you like you hung the moon." "Nonsense," Wilhelmina protested weakly. "Mr. Blackburn is simply being neighborly." "Neighborly," Mrs. Jenkins scoffed. "Girl, that man rescued you from a flood, took you riding, and just waltzed you around this floor like you were made of china. That's not neighborly, that's courting." "It most certainly is not," Wilhelmina insisted, though a part of her thrilled at the idea. "We barely know each other." "Some things you just know," Mrs. Miller said wisely. "When I met my George, I knew within a week he'd be my husband. Sometimes the heart recognizes what the head hasn't figured out yet." Before the conversation could continue, Hayes returned with 2 cups of punch, nodding politely to the ladies who dispersed with knowing smiles and not-so-subtle winks at Wilhelmina. "Everything all right?" he asked, handing her a cup. "Fine," she said quickly. Just town gossip. Hayes grimaced. About us, I'd wager. Does that bother you? She asked, studying his face. He considered this, then shook his head slowly. Not if it doesn't bother you. Their eyes met over the rim of their cups, and Wilhelmina felt as though the crowded room had suddenly emptied, leaving just the two of them in a world of their own. Hayes! A sharp voice broke the spell. Thaddeus Wilkes approached, his face flushed with drink and what appeared to be anger. A word, if you please. Hayes's expression hardened, but he nodded. Excuse me a moment, he said to Wilhelmina before stepping aside with Wilkes. Though they moved several paces away, the music had paused, and Wilhelmina could hear snippets of their heated conversation. Can't believe you're supporting this. Those Indian children in with our own. Not your decision to make. Board voted, Miss Grayson's qualifications. Know what people will say about you. That woman has you bewitched. At this last comment, Hayes's stance changed, his shoulders squaring as he stepped closer to Wilkes, towering over the shorter man. His voice dropped too low for Wilhelmina to hear, but whatever he said made Wilkes's face pale. The exchange ended abruptly, with Wilkes turning on his heel and storming away. Hayes remained where he was for a moment, visibly collecting himself before returning to Wilhelmina's side. I apologize for that interruption, he said stiffly. No need, she replied. I gather Mr. Wilkes was expressing his disapproval of my teaching practices. Hayes's jaw tightened. Among other things, Wilkes forgets himself when he drinks. What did he say to make you so angry? For a moment, she thought Hayes wouldn't answer. Then his expression softened as he looked at her. He suggested that my support for you was based on personal interests rather than professional judgment. And is it? Wilhelmina asked boldly, heart pounding. The music started again, a lively reel that had couples forming lines on the dance floor. Would you like to continue this conversation somewhere more private? Hayes asked instead of answering. Wilhelmina hesitated only briefly before nodding. The garden Mr. Peterson mentioned, perhaps. Hayes offered his arm. Without his questionable intentions, of course. They slipped out a side door into the night air, sweet with the scent of spring blossoms. The garden behind the town hall was indeed lovely, with winding paths illuminated by paper lanterns strung from tree branches. A few other couples strolled the paths, but Hayes led Wilhelmina to a secluded bench beneath a flowering apple tree. Once seated, neither spoke immediately. The music from inside drifted out to them, muted by distance and the walls of the building. To answer your question, Hayes finally said, yes and no. I would support any qualified teacher who wanted to educate all children equally. That's the future I want for this territory, one built on fairness and opportunity for all. He turned slightly to face her, his expression serious in the gentle lantern light. But I can't deny that I find myself drawn to you in ways I haven't experienced before. Your courage, your conviction, your kindness. They're remarkable, Wilhelmina. The use of her full name, spoken with such earnestness, made her heart flutter. We barely know each other, she pointed out, echoing her earlier protest to the town matrons. True enough, Hayes agreed, but I'd like to change that if you're willing. What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Blackburn? Wilhelmina asked, deliberately formal to mask the tumult of her emotions. Court you properly, he said simply. Call on you at the hotel parlor, take you riding on Sundays after church. Bring you flowers and books and whatever else might make you smile. His directness was both disarming and thrilling. In Boston, courtship was a dance of carefully veiled intentions and societal expectations. Here, with this man, everything was laid bare with refreshing honesty. People will talk, she said, though she knew her objection was weak. People already talk, Hayes countered. Might as well give them something worth talking about. A smile tugged at her lips. You make a compelling argument. Is that a yes? He asked, hope evident in his voice. Instead of answering immediately, Wilhelmina reached out and took his hand, her smaller fingers entwining with his larger ones. The calluses on his palm spoke of hard work and a life lived outdoors, so different from her own smooth hands. Yes, she said simply. Though I should warn you, I'm not easily impressed by flowers and trinkets. My affections run deeper than that. Hayes's fingers tightened around hers. I'm counting on it. For a moment they sat in companionable silence, hands joined, the sounds of celebration continuing inside the town hall. Wilhelmina marveled at how quickly her life had changed from the terror of the flood to this quiet moment of connection with a man unlike any she had known before. We should probably return to the dance, Hayes said eventually, though he made no move to stand. Before Mrs. Finch sends out a search party. Wilhelmina laughed softly. She does seem to have appointed herself my guardian. She's a good woman. Looked after me when my mother died, made sure I ate something besides beans and jerky when my father was too grief-stricken to notice I was half-starved. The casual mention of his childhood loss reminded Wilhelmina that everyone in this frontier town carried their own stories of hardship and resilience. My parents died 3 years ago, she offered quietly. Influenza. 1 week they were planning my birthday celebration, the next they were gone. Hayes squeezed her hand gently. I'm sorry, Wilhelmina, that's a hard loss to bear. It's partly why I came west, she admitted. Too many memories in Boston and nothing really holding me there anymore. I wanted to go somewhere I could make a difference. You already have, Hayes said. Those Salish children you're teaching, they'll have opportunities their parents never dreamed possible because of you. The genuine admiration in his voice warmed her through. Rising to her feet, she tugged at their still joined hands. Come, Mr. Blackburn. I believe you promised me more dancing, and I intend to hold you to it. Hayes stood, but instead of moving toward the door, he gently pulled her closer. Before we go back in there and face all those knowing looks and whispers, he said, his voice low, there's something I've wanted to do since I first saw you standing in that floodwater. His free hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch feather light. May I? Wilhelmina's heart raced as she nodded, unable to form words. Hayes leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she remained still, her eyes drifting closed as his lips finally met hers. The kiss was gentle, almost reverent, a question more than a demand. When he began to pull away, Wilhelmina found herself rising on tiptoe to prolong the contact, her hand coming to rest on his chest where she could feel his heart beating as rapidly as her own. When they finally parted, Hayes rested his forehead against hers for a moment. Been wanting to do that for a week, he murmured. Worth the wait? She asked, a hint of teasing in her voice despite the breathlessness she couldn't quite control. His slow smile was answer enough. Offering his arm once more, he led her back toward the hall, both of them knowing that whatever came next, something precious and unexpected, had begun in the spring flood of Deer Lodge, Montana. As summer bloomed across the valley, Wilhelmina and Hayes settled into a courtship that quickly became the talk of Deer Lodge. True to his word, Hayes called on her regularly at the hotel parlor, took her riding on Sunday afternoons, and occasionally surprised her at the schoolhouse with wildflower bouquets or interesting books for her students. For her part, Wilhelmina threw herself into teaching with passionate dedication, earning the respect of even her most skeptical parents. The Salish children thrived under her tutelage, particularly Joseph, whose mathematical abilities surpassed those of students several years his senior. In late June, Hayes invited Wilhelmina to visit his ranch for the first time. "Nothing improper," he assured her. "My foreman's wife, Mrs. Callahan, will be there to maintain your reputation. I just want you to see the place." The Blackburn Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley. The main house, a substantial two-story structure built of solid timber. Unlike many frontier dwellings, it had glass windows that gleamed in the summer sun, a wide veranda wrapping around three sides, and carefully tended flower beds along the front walkway. "It's beautiful," Wilhelmina said as Hayes helped her down from the buggy he'd driven. "My father built the original cabin," Hayes explained, pride evident in his voice. "Added on as the ranch grew. My mother planted those roses before she died. Mrs. Callahan keeps them going, says the place needs a woman's touch." As if summoned by her name, a stout woman with iron-gray hair emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "About time you brought her around," she called, approaching with a broad smile. "I was beginning to think you were ashamed of your home, Hayes Blackburn." "Never that, Mrs. Callahan," Hayes replied with easy affection, just waiting for the right moment. "Mrs. Callahan, this is Miss Wilhelmina Grayson. Wilhelmina, Mrs. Sarah Callahan, the true ruler of the Blackburn Ranch." "Nonsense," Mrs. Callahan scoffed, though she looked pleased. "Come in, Miss Grayson. I've got lemonade cooling and fresh bread just out of the oven." The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior, spacious rooms with well-crafted furniture, some clearly brought at great expense from back east, others made with skilled local craftsmanship. Books lined one wall of the sitting room, making Wilhelmina's eyes widen with delight. "You never mentioned you were a reader," she said, running her fingers along the spines. Shakespeare nestled alongside practical volumes on animal husbandry and territorial law. "My mother's influence," Hayes said, watching her explore. "She taught me to read before I could ride. Said a man needs both to truly make his way in the world." After refreshments, Hayes took her on a tour of the ranch, the barn with its impressive stock of horses, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands lived, the corrals where young calves frolicked under their mother's watchful eyes. "You've built something remarkable here," Wilhelmina said as they stood watching a young cowboy breaking a spirited colt in the round pen. "We have," Hayes corrected. "My father laid the foundation, and I've expanded it, but it takes all of us, the Callahans, the ranch hands, even the Salish who work seasonally to make it thrive." His humility only increased Wilhelmina's admiration. Here was a man who could have lorded his success over others, but chose instead to share the credit, to see his accomplishments as part of a community effort. As summer progressed into fall, their courtship deepened. Hayes began joining Wilhelmina at church each Sunday, sitting beside her in the pew to the approving nods of most congregants and the barely concealed scowl of Thaddeus Wilkes. Wilkes hadn't given up his campaign against educating the Salish children, using his influence to pressure other parents and even attempting to sway the school board. But with Hayes's steadfast support and Wilhelmina's proven success in the classroom, his efforts gained little traction. One crisp October morning, Hayes arrived at the schoolhouse just as Wilhelmina was dismissing her students for the day. "Mr. Blackburn," several children called out, clustering around him. Hayes had become a favorite visitor, sometimes bringing interesting specimens from the ranch for science lessons, a perfectly preserved bird's nest, the shed skin of a snake, or once, to everyone's delight, a day-old calf that needed extra attention. Today, however, he came empty-handed except for a small envelope he tucked into his pocket when he saw Wilhelmina watching. "Miss Grayson," he said, tipping his hat. "Thought I might walk you back to the hotel if you're finished for the day." "I'd like that," she replied, gathering her books and shawl. They walked slowly through town, enjoying the autumn colors and exchanging news of their respective days. As they neared the hotel, Hayes steered her toward a small park where a bench sat beneath a golden-leaved cottonwood tree. "Mind if we sit for a minute?" he asked. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." A flutter of anticipation rose in Wilhelmina's chest as they settled on the bench. Over the past months, she had fallen deeply in love with Hayes Blackburn, though neither had spoken the words aloud yet. Their kisses had grown more passionate, their conversations more intimate, and lately she had caught herself dreaming of a future that seemed increasingly possible. "What is it?" she asked, noting the unusual nervousness in his demeanor. Hayes took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about the future, about my life and what I want from it." "And what conclusions have you reached?" Wilhelmina prompted when he paused. "That I want you in it," he said simply. "Not just as someone I court or call on at the hotel parlor, but as my partner, my wife." From his pocket, he withdrew the envelope he'd tucked away earlier, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small but perfect diamond catching the afternoon sunlight. "This was my mother's," he said, holding it between them. "My father gave it to her when they had nothing but dreams and determination. I'd be honored if you would wear it, Wilhelmina. If you would marry me and make the ranch a true home again." Tears welled in Wilhelmina's eyes, not of sadness but of overwhelming joy. "Hayes," she whispered, her voice catching. "Before you answer," he continued, his own voice rough with emotion, "you should know what you'd be agreeing to. Life on a ranch isn't easy, even one as established as ours. There are hard times, droughts, harsh winters, sickness in the herd. It's beautiful but demanding country." "You think I don't know that?" Wilhelmina asked, reaching out to touch his face. "I've been in Deer Lodge for 6 months now. I've seen how people struggle and how they persevere. It hasn't scared me away yet." "What about your teaching?" Hayes asked. "I wouldn't ask you to give that up if it's truly what you want." The consideration in his question, the recognition of her as a person with her own ambitions, and not just a potential wife, cemented her certainty. "I love teaching," she acknowledged, "but there are other ways to educate. I've been thinking about starting a small school at the ranch for the children of your workers and nearby homesteaders who live too far from town. With your permission, of course." Hayes's face lit up. "You've been planning this." "Hoping," she corrected. "Dreaming, perhaps." "But yes, I've thought about what a life with you might look like." "And," he prompted, the ring still held between them, glinting in the dappled sunlight. "And I would be honored to be your wife, Hayes Blackburn," Wilhelmina said, her voice clear and certain now. "To share your home, your struggles, and your triumphs. To build a life and a family with you." With hands that trembled slightly, Hayes slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if made for her, the gold band warm against her skin. "I love you, Wilhelmina Grayson," he said, speaking the words aloud for the first time. "Have since I carried you through that flood, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself back then." "And I love you," she replied, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain. Enough to brave floods, blizzards, and even Thaddeus Wilkes's disapproval. Hayes laughed, the sound rich with happiness, before pulling her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of shared joys and challenges, of passion and partnership. As they walked back to the hotel, hands entwined, Wilhelmina couldn't help but marvel at how a moment of danger, being stranded in a flooded street, had led to this moment of perfect certainty. How a stranger's strong arms and simple words, "You're not walking alone," had somehow contained the promise of all that was to come. The wedding took place on a crisp November day, with the mountains already dusted with the season's first snow. The entire town turned out for the celebration, held in the church with a reception afterward at the town hall. Even Thaddeus Wilkes attended, grudgingly offering his congratulations with a stiff nod. "Probably just making sure it actually happened," Hayes murmured to Wilhelmina as Wilkes walked away. "Afraid you might come to your senses at the last minute." "Not a chance," she replied, squeezing his hand. "I knew exactly what I was doing when I said yes." The townspeople had embraced their romance wholeheartedly, seeing in it a perfect frontier story, the brave schoolteacher and the honorable rancher, coming together to build something that represented the best of what the territory could be. Mrs. Finch wept openly during the ceremony and declared at the reception that she'd known from the moment Hayes carried Wilhelmina into her hotel that they were destined for one another. "Matchmaking takes skill," she told anyone who would listen. "And I've got the touch, I surely do." Wilhelmina's students presented her with a handmade quilt, each child having sewn a square with their name and a symbol representing what they'd learned from her. Joseph's square featured an intricately embroidered mathematical equation, while Lucy Miller's showed a picture of children of different backgrounds holding hands. The school board had already approved Wilhelmina's replacement, a young woman from Minnesota who shared her progressive views on education. But they'd also expressed enthusiasm for her idea of establishing a small school at the Blackburn Ranch, even offering to provide books and supplies. As the celebration wound down, Hayes led his bride to the waiting buggy, decorated with ribbons and flowers by the ranch hands. The November air held a biting chill, but Wilhelmina hardly noticed, wrapped in her new husband's coat and the warmth of the day's events. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Blackburn?" Hayes asked, helping her into the buggy. The new name sent a thrill through her. "I've been ready since you asked me to marry you," she replied, settling beside him on the seat. As they drove away from town, the sounds of celebration fading behind them, Wilhelmina looked up at the vast Montana sky, stars beginning to appear in the darkening expanse. The future stretched before them, full of promise and possibility. "What are you thinking about?" Hayes asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "About how one moment can change everything," she said, leaning against his shoulder. "If it hadn't rained that day, if you hadn't happened to be in town, I would have found you anyway," Hayes said with certainty. "Some things are meant to be, flood or no flood." Wilhelmina smiled, warmed by his conviction. "I believe you're right." Life at the Blackburn Ranch quickly settled into a rhythm that suited Wilhelmina perfectly. The spacious house no longer felt like just Hayes's childhood home, but became their shared domain. She added her books to his library, hung curtains she'd sewn herself in the bedroom, and planted new flowers alongside his mother's roses. Mrs. Callahan, initially wary of having another woman in what had been her domain, soon became Wilhelmina's staunchest ally. The older woman taught her the intricacies of managing a ranch household, everything from preserving the fall harvest to treating common ailments when the doctor was too far away. "You're a quick study," Mrs. Callahan observed one day as they finished canning peaches. "Some city women never adapt to ranch life, but you've got the spirit for it." "I want to belong here," Wilhelmina admitted, "to be a true partner to Hayes, not just his Boston-bred wife." Mrs. Callahan patted her hand. "You already belong, child. Anyone can see that." By spring, Wilhelmina had established her small school in a converted storage building near the main house. 6 children attended regularly, the Callahans' grandchildren, 2 children of ranch hands, and 2 Salish children whose fathers worked seasonally at the ranch. Hayes expanded the building when enrollment grew to 12 by summer, adding large windows to let in natural light and building proper desks to replace the makeshift tables they'd started with. He often stopped by during lessons, listening from the doorway with evident pride as Wilhelmina engaged her students in lively discussions. "You're a natural teacher," he told her one evening as they sat on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink. "Those children adore you." "I love teaching them," Wilhelmina said, "but lately I've been thinking about another kind of teaching as well." Hayes raised an eyebrow questioningly. With a small smile, Wilhelmina took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "Teaching our own child. If my calculations are correct, we should welcome a new Blackburn sometime in early winter." Hayes's expression transformed from confusion to wonder to overwhelming joy in the span of seconds. "A baby, you're certain?" "As certain as I can be," she nodded. "Mrs. Callahan confirmed it, said she recognized the signs even before I did." In one fluid motion, Hayes pulled her onto his lap, cradling her against his chest as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain. "Wilhelmina," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "I never thought. That is, I hoped someday, but so soon." "Are you pleased?" she asked, though the answer was written plainly on his face. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it," he said, pressing his lips to her forehead. "Ecstatic, terrified, overwhelmed, all of those and more." Wilhelmina laughed softly. "That makes two of us." As her body changed with the growing life inside her, Wilhelmina continued teaching but allowed Hayes to take over more of the physical aspects of ranch life she had enthusiastically embraced. He hovered protectively, much to Mrs. Callahan's amusement. Never seen a man so concerned about a natural process. The older woman chuckled one day as Hayes insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that Wilhelmina had been about to pick up. "You'd think women hadn't been having babies since the beginning of time." "Let him fuss," Wilhelmina said with a fond smile at her husband's retreating back. "It makes him feel useful." "Men need that," Mrs. Callahan agreed sagely, "especially with something so firmly in women's domain as birthing." As winter approached, Hayes insisted on hiring additional help around the house so Wilhelmina could rest more. He also arranged for the doctor from Deer Lodge to stay at the ranch during the week before her expected delivery date. "You're being excessive," Wilhelmina told him, though she was touched by his concern. "I'm being prepared," Hayes countered. "This valley can get cut off for days when it snows heavily. I won't take chances with you or our child." On a cold December night, with snow falling gently outside, Wilhelmina went into labor. The doctor and Mrs. Callahan ushered Hayes from the bedroom despite his protests. "This is women's work now," Mrs. Callahan told him firmly. "Go pace the hallway like every other father to be since time began." For 14 hours, Hayes did exactly that, wearing a path in the hallway rug, pausing only when the doctor emerged occasionally to report progress. When at last a lusty cry pierced the night, Hayes froze mid-step, his heart pounding. The bedroom door opened and the doctor appeared, exhaustion and satisfaction mingled on his face. "Congratulations, Mr. Blackburn. You have a son, a strong, healthy boy." Hayes's legs nearly gave out beneath him. "And Wilhelmina, tired but well, she's asking for you." Nothing could have prepared Hayes for the sight that greeted him. Wilhelmina, hair damp with exertion but face radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he entered, her smile so full of love it took his breath away. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Approaching the bed with reverence, Hayes sat carefully beside her, peering at the small red face nestled against her breast. The baby's eyes were closed, his miniature features still swollen from birth, yet Hayes had never seen anything more perfect. "He's incredible," he whispered, reaching out one finger to touch the downy head. "You're incredible. We thought we might name him William after my father," Wilhelmina said. "William Hayes Blackburn." "It's a good, strong name," Hayes agreed, his voice husky with emotion. "He'll need it in this country." As the doctor and Mrs. Callahan discreetly left the new family alone, Hayes stretched out beside Wilhelmina on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, their son cradled between them. "Thank you," he said, pressing his lips to her temple. "For what?" Wilhelmina asked, leaning into his embrace. "For coming to Deer Lodge, for being stranded in that flood, for loving me, for him." Hayes nodded toward their sleeping son. "For making my life complete in ways I never imagined possible." Wilhelmina turned her face to his, their lips meeting in a tender kiss. "We've only just begun," she murmured. "There's so much more ahead for us." Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the Blackburn Ranch in pristine white. Inside, warmed by fire and love and the miracle of new life, Wilhelmina and Hayes held their son and each other, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges the frontier might bring, they would face them together. 5 years later, on another spring day much like the one when they first met, Hayes and Wilhelmina stood on the veranda of their ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. William, now a sturdy 5-year-old with his father's eyes and his mother's quick mind, chased his 3-year-old sister, Sarah, named after Mrs. Callahan, who had become like a grandmother to them both. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. Hayes had expanded the operation, adding sheep to their cattle holdings at Wilhelmina's suggestion, a diversification that had seen them through a difficult drought 2 years prior, when many smaller ranches failed. Wilhelmina's school had grown as well. A proper schoolhouse now stood near the main house, with 25 students attending regularly from the ranch and surrounding homesteads. She had hired a young assistant teacher, allowing her to balance her educational passion with her family responsibilities. "Look at them," Hayes said, his arm around Wilhelmina's waist as they watched their children. "William's already showing Sarah how to rope that fence post. Born ranchers, both of them." "With books in their saddlebags, I hope," Wilhelmina teased. "Your mother would expect no less." "Our children will have the best of both worlds," Hayes assured her. "The education you value so highly and the connection to the land that my family has built." A rider appeared at the edge of the ranch yard, approaching at a steady trot. As he drew closer, Wilhelmina recognized Joseph, no longer the shy 12-year-old she had first taught, but now a tall young man of 17. "Miss Wilhelmina, Mr. Hayes," he called, dismounting with easy grace, though Wilhelmina was now Mrs. Blackburn to most. Her first Salish students still used the name they had known her by initially. "Joseph," Wilhelmina greeted him warmly. "What brings you out this way?" "Letters from Helena," the young man said, producing a packet from his saddlebag. "Mr. Collins at the post office asked if I could deliver them since I was riding this direction." Hayes took the letters with a nod of thanks. "How is your family?" "Well, thank you. My father asks if you need extra hands for the summer roundup." "My cousins Thomas and James would like to work too." "Tell him yes, definitely," Hayes replied. "We'll need good men with the new herd coming in from Wyoming next month." As they chatted, Wilhelmina glanced through the letters. One bore an official seal she recognized from the territorial capital. "Hayes," she said, holding it up. "It's from the Education Department." With a curious frown, Hayes opened the letter, scanning its contents. His expression changed from confusion to surprise to pride as he read. "Wilhelmina," he said, handing her the letter. "They want you to serve on the Territorial Education Committee, to help establish standards for schools throughout Montana, especially regarding the education of Indian children." Wilhelmina read the letter herself, hardly believing the words. but this would mean traveling to Helena for meetings, speaking at public forums. I couldn't possibly. You absolutely could, Hayes interrupted. Who better? You've proven right here what's possible when all children receive proper education. But the children, the ranch, will be here when you return, Hayes said firmly. Sarah and I can manage for a few days at a time. Miss Caroline is more than capable of handling the school in your absence. Joseph, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. You should do it, Miss Wilhelmina. My sister Mary wants to become a teacher because of you. If more schools were like yours, more of our children could have dreams like hers. The simple sincerity in his voice moved Wilhelmina deeply. She looked at Hayes, saw the pride and encouragement in his eyes, and felt a surge of purpose. I'll accept, she decided, if you're certain you can manage without me for short periods. More than certain, Hayes assured her, though I'll miss you terribly each time you go. That evening, after the children were asleep, Wilhelmina and Hayes sat before the fire in their bedroom, discussing the implications of her new role. I never imagined when I came to Deer Lodge that I might someday have a voice in shaping education for the entire territory. Wilhelmina mused, leaning against Hayes's chest as they shared the oversized chair he had built specifically for such moments. I always knew you were destined for important work, Hayes said, his fingers gently combing through her unbound hair. It's one of the countless reasons I fell in love with you. Do you ever regret it? She asked suddenly, pulling me from that flood. Taking on a wife who isn't content just to manage your household. Hayes tilted her chin up to look into her eyes. Regret the best decision I ever made, not for a single moment. Your passion, your convictions, your refusal to accept injustice, they've made the ranch stronger, our children wiser, and me a better man. He kissed her then, a kiss that still held all the tenderness of their first but deepened by years of shared joys and hardships, of knowing each other's bodies and hearts in the most intimate ways. Besides, he added with a mischievous glint in his eyes, I rather enjoy telling people my wife helps shape territorial policy while still finding time to make the best apple pie in Montana. Wilhelmina laughed, swatting his arm playfully. Flatterer, Mrs. Callahan taught me that recipe, and you know it. Speaking of Mrs. Callahan, Hayes said, his tone shifting to something more serious. She mentioned retiring soon. Says her bones can't take the Montana winters anymore. She and Callahan are thinking of moving to Oregon to be near their daughter. We'll miss them terribly, Wilhelmina said, genuinely saddened by the prospect. They've been the heart of this ranch for so long. True enough, Hayes agreed. But they've earned their rest, and Callahan thinks his nephew is ready to step up as foreman. Young Matt's been learning the ropes for 3 years now. Another change, Wilhelmina murmured. So much has changed since I first arrived in Deer Lodge. And so much remains the same, Hayes countered. The mountains, the seasons, the way the light catches in your hair when you stand in the garden. His hand moved to rest over her heart. The way I feel about you that's only grown stronger with time. Wilhelmina covered his hand with her own. When I was stranded in that flood, terrified and alone, I never imagined that the man who rescued me would become my husband, the father of my children, the partner in all my dreams. You're not walking alone, Hayes said softly, echoing the words he'd spoken on that fateful day. Not then, not now, not ever. As they settled into bed later, Wilhelmina curled against Hayes's solid warmth. She reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From a rain-swollen street in Deer Lodge to a thriving ranch, from strangers to lovers to parents, from individual dreams to shared visions. The path hadn't always been smooth. They'd weathered droughts and blizzards, financial strains during lean years, the normal tensions that arise between two strong-willed people building a life together. But through it all, they had faced each challenge side by side, stronger together than apart. Outside, a spring rain began to fall, gentle and nourishing, so different from the flood that had first brought them together. Wilhelmina listened to its rhythm on the roof, to Hayes's steady breathing beside her, to the occasional creak of the house that had become so much a part of her. Tomorrow would bring its own demands: children to raise, a school to run, a new responsibility to the territory's educational future. But for now, in the quiet darkness, Wilhelmina gave silent thanks for floodwaters and the cowboy who had waded into them, for the life they had built and the love that continued to grow between them, as enduring as the Montana mountains and as life-giving as the spring rain. 10 years after the flood that brought them together, Hayes and Wilhelmina Blackburn had become pillars of the community. Their ranch flourished, known throughout the territory for its progressive management practices and fair treatment of workers. Their school had gained recognition as a model for frontier education, with several of Wilhelmina's former students going on to become teachers themselves, including Mary, Joseph's sister, who now taught at the main school in Deer Lodge. Montana had achieved statehood in 1889, and Wilhelmina's work on the Education Committee had helped shape policies that ensured access to schooling for all children in the new state. Hayes, too, had taken on leadership roles, serving on the Cattlemen's Association and occasionally mediating disputes between ranchers and homesteaders as the region continued to develop. Their family had grown as well. William, now 10, showed every sign of being a natural rancher with his father's instincts for animals and land management. Sarah, 8, had inherited her mother's love of books and learning, often reading to her younger brother James, a precocious 4-year-old with boundless energy and curiosity. The Blackburn Ranch had become a gathering place for the community, hosting barbecues in summer and holiday celebrations in winter. The annual Harvest Festival, in particular, had become a tradition, bringing together ranch families, townspeople, and Salish workers for a day of feasting, games, and music that bridged cultural divides. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Hayes surprised Wilhelmina by arranging for Mrs. Finch, now retired but still as sharp-tongued and warm-hearted as ever, to watch the children for a weekend, while he took his wife on a special trip. "Where are we going?" Wilhelmina asked as Hayes helped her into the buggy early on a spring morning, the air crisp with the promise of warming later. "It's a surprise," Hayes said with a mysterious smile. "Just trust me." The buggy headed not toward Deer Lodge as Wilhelmina expected, but along a less traveled road that followed the creek upstream. After an hour's journey, Hayes turned onto an even narrower track that wound into a secluded valley Wilhelmina had never visited before. As they rounded a bend, a small cabin came into view, nestled against a backdrop of pine trees, a stream gurgling nearby. Smoke rose from the chimney, suggesting someone was already there. "Hayes?" Wilhelmina questioned, curiosity piqued. "I had Matt ride ahead this morning to light the fire and leave everything ready," Hayes explained, bringing the buggy to a halt. "This is Blackburn land, has been for years, but it's so remote I rarely come up here. My father built this hunting cabin before I was born." He helped her down, then retrieved a basket and small valise from the back of the buggy. "I thought we deserved some time alone, away from the ranch, the school, the children, as much as we love them all." Wilhelmina's heart warmed at his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect." The cabin's interior was rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a solid wooden table and chairs, and a bed covered with quilts against the spring chill. Matt had indeed prepared well. The fire crackled invitingly. A pot of coffee simmered on the small stove, and fresh wildflowers brightened the table. "I've been working on it when you thought I was checking the north pasture," Hayes admitted, setting down their things. "Fixed the roof, replaced some rotten boards, made it comfortable for you." "For us," Wilhelmina corrected, slipping her arms around his waist. "It's wonderful, Hayes." They spent the day exploring the valley, fishing in the stream, where Wilhelmina caught a larger trout than Hayes, much to his mock chagrin, and simply enjoying each other's uninterrupted company, a rare luxury for parents of 3 active children running a large ranch and school. As evening approached, they prepared a simple meal together, working in comfortable harmony in the small cabin space. After eating, Hayes produced a bottle of wine he'd tucked away in their supplies. "A special occasion deserves a special toast," he said, pouring 2 glasses. 10 years ago today, I carried a soaking wet, indignant schoolteacher through a flooded street, never imagining she would change my life forever." Wilhelmina smiled, accepting her glass. "And I never imagined the arrogant cowboy who lifted me without so much as a by your leave would become the center of my world." "Arrogant?" Hayes raised an eyebrow in feigned offense. "Confident, then," Wilhelmina amended with a laugh. "Impossibly handsome and annoyingly heroic." "That's better," Hayes grinned, raising his glass. "To 10 years of partnership and to many more ahead." "To us," Wilhelmina agreed, clinking her glass against his. Later, as they lay together beneath the quilts, the fire casting a warm glow across the cabin, Hayes propped himself on one elbow to look down at his wife. His fingers traced the delicate lines that had begun to appear at the corners of her eyes, evidence of a decade of laughter and sunshine. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives might have been if it hadn't rained that day?" he asked. "If you had arrived in Deer Lodge in fair weather," Wilhelmina considered this, her hand coming up to caress his cheek, roughened by the day's stubble. "Sometimes. But I believe we would have found each other anyway. Perhaps at the schoolhouse when you came to enroll the ranch children, or at church, or the Founders' Day dance." "You're probably right," Hayes agreed, "though I might not have had the excuse to sweep you into my arms quite so quickly." "You've never needed an excuse for that," Wilhelmina pointed out with a smile that still, after 10 years, made Hayes's heart beat faster. "True enough," he acknowledged, lowering his head to kiss her, a kiss that deepened with the ease of long familiarity and the excitement that had never dimmed between them. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering gently on the cabin roof, a different spring shower than the one that had flooded Deer Lodge a decade before, but a reminder nonetheless of how their story began. As the years passed, the Blackburn family continued to grow and evolve. William followed in his father's footsteps, eventually taking over management of large portions of the ranch. Sarah's academic talents led her to college in Boston, the first Blackburn to pursue higher education, before returning to Montana to establish a women's academy in Helena. James, the youngest, surprised everyone by combining his parents' different passions, becoming a veterinarian who advocated for better educational standards in animal husbandry throughout the West. Hayes and Wilhelmina weathered the changes of the new century together, the arrival of automobiles and telephones, the Great War that took young men from Montana ranches to European battlefields, the influenza epidemic that recalled painful memories for Wilhelmina of her parents' deaths. Through it all, they remained each other's steadfast support, their love deepening with shared joys and sorrows. The ranch prospered under their stewardship and later their children's, becoming a model of sustainable practices long before such concepts were widely recognized. On their 50th anniversary, with their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren gathered around them at the ranch. Hayes and Wilhelmina sat together on the veranda where they had spent so many evenings over the decades. "Did you ever imagine this?" Wilhelmina asked, her hand still fitting perfectly in his despite the changes age had wrought in them both. All of this from that moment in the flood. Hayes, his hair now white but his eyes still bright with the same intelligence and kindness that had first captured her heart, shook his head slowly. "I hoped for a good life. I hoped you might consider marrying me someday. But this," he gestured toward their family, laughing and talking across the ranch yard, "this exceeds every dream I ever had." "You know," Wilhelmina said thoughtfully, "what I remember most about that day isn't the fear or the rain or even being rescued. It's what you said to me. You're not walking alone. You've kept that promise for 50 years, Hayes Blackburn." "And I always will," he replied, bringing her hand to his lips, "in this world and whatever comes after." As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the same golden light that had illuminated their first days together, Hayes and Wilhelmina Blackburn watched their legacy unfold before them, a family built on love, a ranch founded on respect for the land and all who worked it, a community strengthened by their contributions. From floodwaters to sunset years, their journey had been one of shared purpose and deepening devotion. And though they had faced challenges that would have broken lesser partnerships, they had weathered each storm together, emerging stronger for having faced them side by side. In the end, that was their greatest accomplishment, not the prosperous ranch or the educational innovations or even their beloved children, though they cherished all of these. Their triumph was the love they had nurtured from an unexpected beginning in a flooded street to a lifetime of walking together, supporting each other, building something lasting and meaningful in the wild heart of Montana. As the stars appeared overhead, Hayes slipped his arm around Wilhelmina's shoulders, drawing her close as he had countless times before. No words were needed between them now, just the comfortable silence of two people who had shared a lifetime of conversations, who knew each other's thoughts almost before they were formed, who had grown not just old together but wise in the ways of love's endurance. In that moment, as in every important moment of their lives since that rainy spring day in Deer Lodge, they faced the future together, secure in the knowledge that whatever came next, neither would walk alone.